On one planet, the majority of the creatures were tall, but a small minority always believed that they personally were not tall enough. So, they worked on it until they became taller, and ultimately became the majority, and their height became the standard. But if you think that ends the tale, then your mind's too short. For shortly, a new minority appeared among them who believed that the new height was insufficient. And so, as you should know, it goes. Now for some combination theological and zoological news. Lions and other assorted creatures on this planet never get anywhere because of their lackadaisical attitude. Shape up, you saps. Don't you ever want to amount to anything? And several priests and not a few scientists were much relieved that we use as examples dumb animals. Men like to speak of quelling the fires of anger, lust, and greed that rage in the human mind, giving rare note to their kindling. If you don't know where you are, it's hard to know where you're going. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's hard to know that too. When the majority are confronted with unusually uncivilized behavior involving more than a few, they are wont to explain it by referring to the anomalous presence of a mob mentality. Whereas at man's routine level, there is no other type of mentality, including the majorities. After a near lifetime spent surfing the many spiritual texts, one man came to realize that as men have forever spoken of the necessity for compassion to ever achieve the awakening, what they were unknowingly referring to was the requirement for absolute impartiality of thought. But compassion seems to sound better, and it's shorter too. The greater the need, the more tolerance will men grant to the gap between words and the reality to which they refer. On one world, every time one man's head would explode, the rest of them would take him as their hero. Those who know are only impressed when it is their building that burns down. Possessing no intellect comparable to man's, animals cannot be said to know what they are doing. They simply live. While man, on the other paw, being able to think, must be spoken of as not only living, but also as knowing what he's about in this pursuit. Right? Now don't everyone growl out your answer at once. So reflected one man one day. What kind of spiritual maturity and increase in wisdom is it that is tied to the physical decrease in hormonal activity? And yet, such is the standard type known to ordinary men. And may I point out to you again, as pertinent and obscure as may seem the connection, that a man who takes credit for anything is not a man who knows. On one world, when the young creatures became mature enough to start receiving the education needed by the planet, and indirectly so by the creatures collectively, the first thing that occurs is the effort to take from them most of what they've already non-verbally learned, and those parts left severely conditioned. There was once a mystical order that went by the name of How Fun. Oh yeah, there was also an ancient order that was called Be Defiant. Oh, and there was also another mystical group whose rallying cry, when translated from the Mongolian or whatever it was Fun-Filled Defiance. Though I do think it's safe to assume that their definitions of fun and defiance might deviate somewhat from the common. When it came his turn, one man stood and pronounced, "Accept no substitute for the real substitute," which I define as civilization and the common comfy mental life of man. He sat back down amidst something a bit less than overwhelming applause and approval. Perhaps he picked an overtly ersatz forum for his comment. But then again, what other choices are normally available? As the boy headed for the door, his father called out to him, "Don't you go off and swallow a parrot and then come back here begging for God knows what." And the boy stopped and said, What? And the old man replied, "See, you're starting already." One man once pondered, when men become aware of their own mortality, they begin to feel that life is falling apart. So why, when they become aware of their own stupidity, don't they feel like life is dumbing apart? Another one of those splendid questions that ordinary men can sometimes ask, but they should be thankful, seldom answer. Although everyone from philosophers to scientists say that they want to know the full and complete truth about everything, one truth that they still do not recognize is that men believe that they want to know more than they actually want to know. More about journeys. One man noted to his son, who seemed interested in adventure, "While there may be 6 billion roads to Istanbul, only a few will ever be traveled." Some years later, the son noted to his son, "While there may be billions of roads to Istanbul, the only one of consequence is the one you travel." And years after that, the great-grandson of the first man still found his way there. The desire has been with man always. Only the names of the paving contractors change. Ordinary minds, being primarily interested in man's behavior, can thus, as the body ages and its appetites decrease, attribute to itself an increase in tolerance and understanding. A conclusion ill-founded from any knowledgeable view. A man in a crowd once asked a mystic, "What distinction be there between the laments of the ordinary and those of the enlightened?" And the mystic replied, "The enlightened know the speciousness of theirs." And after all the applause had died down, the mystic added, "Which still doesn't make them find it any more acceptable." A man once did a genie's sister a favor, and in return the spirit gave the man a choice of rewards, that he could be made to either find pain intolerable or else stupidity. And a man in a crowd said, "How come I can't find a genie like that?" And while he meant this rhetorically, I'll still answer the question. It's because it's all in your mind. And men don't know to look there. No one is helped by being picked on, except for the few, born with the ability to comprehend a view of change that transcends the routine. Shall we once again momentarily visit the plain and obvious, to wit, that only those who want to learn, learn. That men's basic views of life and death are flawed should be evident by the fact that even the products of his own invention, that is, that any aspect of civilization, once dead, cannot be revived. And as evidence of man's faulty use of the mind is the fact that the above doesn't seem to literally make sense, and yet it does. The speaker came out and so addressed the crowd. When an anxious man knows not what else to do, he preaches. And someone raised a hand and immediately asked, but could he not say nothing and instead, for instance, do something like go for a run or do sit-ups or something like that? And the speaker was really and pleasantly surprised to have finally found an audience worth talking to. For those of you keeping a notebook, you might like to jot down the fact that every good transcendental conversation ever had was not between people, but between pauses in one man's thinking. And thus, I assume you understand why all of the truly great dialogues never get written down. There was once a farmer who left his home and joined the ranks of the warriors. Therein he had many wondrous adventures and saw many marvelous sights. But the day came when he returned home, and when his neighbors asked him to describe what all he had experienced, he realized he was unable to do so. Put also in your notebook that this too occurred solely in one man's mind. Do you begin to see a pattern to all of this? Some of you, in fact, might enjoy hearing that once upon a time someone referred to this kind of activity and the ultimate discovery of the truth about life as the pattern on a carpet consuming the carpet, so that nothing is left of the carpet or pattern but what was there before. After years of the best scrutiny he could muster of his thinking, a certain chap ultimately said to himself, "The absolute absurdity of it still does not stop the appearance of its periodic seriousness. All in all be told, men do not recognize the full power of the mind, in that they fail to recognize that it operates from a base of having none. This, as any good physicist from another world can tell you, is potency at the max." The inner credo of one knightly order, now long and probably just as well forgotten, went, "Only the stupid ask for forgiveness. Only the stupid need forgiveness. So consider what horse that has us ride, old chum." As long as you believe in death and that men are individually conscious, you will believe them in need of compassion. And now, the etymological considerations of thought. Entomological considerations of thought. The mind is like a spider caught in its own web. After listening to the news here, one man has come to this finding. If the actual location of civilization is in man's head, then so too is history. So what am I doing with all these expensive books on the subject? If nothing else, knowing where to look can save you a ton of money. When you understand fully what thinking's about, there's nothing left to think about. In the more complex scenario, after a knight has taken up his king's quest and discovered the Grail then sends him back to rediscover the king. Simple men make simple discoveries. But as long as they stay simple, they find this sufficient for them. In his travels, after passing the same spot several billion times, one man suddenly recognized it. When the spirit to change and grow has been taken out of a man, the man has been taken out of him. One guy says he doesn't feel like he's making much progress unless he can periodically glance at himself in the mirror and hardly recognize who he is. knowledge and chronology. To children, you speak literally. To larger children, you speak metaphorically. And to grown-up children, you again speak literally. Toward the end of one extreme mountain trail was a sign that said, "Only fools still worry about what it all means." To continue what we were speaking on last time, does anyone realize what a neat piece of verbal, if not neural ledger domain that is? For those who may be watching this for the first time, or those who only see it infrequently, to start off the show saying, "What a pickup last time." I mean, it gives the illusion. It gives them the distinct impression that there is an actual plan, sequence, some program to this. It makes people feel better. It doesn't, of course, make people feel better. It makes them mentally feel more comfortable, which, of course, is my primary intention in life. Even though it would seem from the studio audience that there is reaction on some people's parts that I meant that in a humorous way, I might point out that even if we're engaging in a bit of dramatic sarcasm, little good it does me, because even if it were my intent to upset people, when it comes to a battle of a human against the irreversible, mechanical, natural wearing down of one's hormonal excitement in life, you would not even find a knowledgeable bookie that would take a bet on the outcome at any odds, because there is no doubt involved, thus no basis for a wager. I just thought of a new book title, "The Loneliness of the Solitude Understander." Actually, this does what I was going to do, have a bit of what we were speaking of last time. I wanted to point out to you a bit further that there are absolute laws governing the non-physical existence of man, but they are such an integral part of said existence that he never has occasion to comprehend them. He never sees what's going on. He sees the manifestation. That's why the examples I can bring out are so easy to find that the newspapers every day is full of them. Life is full of them. And there they are. I don't have to pull out examples or come up with concoctions about dead spirits or superhuman beings. All you got to do is take what's going on, and it is miraculous and mysterious enough to a few people, not ultimately, but to a few people to start with, the mystery, the wonder of it being when you start seeing what life's about and thinking, how did I, a fairly reasonable person, live to be 30 or 40 years old and be this stupid? Of course, it's a rhetorical question by them, because you realize the answer, even though it seemed to have gotten caught in the wearing blender with some of you with which I opened this, that you realize the answer to your own rhetorical question, how could I live all these years and be so stupid? It's because it was you against every other molecule. Every other molecule's combined momentum in this universe, in this reality. It was you against it. Them, it, all. So to say, how could I be so stupid? If it were not rhetorical, it would be the epitome of blasphemous hubris to even expect that it could have been any other way. That privately, one who begins to see what life's about can look upon himself and life rhetorically just to himself and go, It's amazing that I could have lived this long being absolute, I am the poster boy for stupidity, for dazzled, distracted. And of course it's even worse when you see it, because you realize that for 30 or 40 years you have been, to some degree, strutting around. I don't mean in some great show of so-called vanity, but you have been strutting around on the basis that for most of these 30 or 40 years, whatever it was, you've been operating just like everyone else, nothing particularly unusual, but you've been operating just like everyone else on the basis that, oh yes, I know what I'm doing. And you look back and you think, I didn't even have a clue. Of course, as I said, by then you don't take it personally, because you realize that no one else does. And you also realize that it doesn't matter. It only mattered to you. Only you thought that you weren't tall enough. Everybody else was satisfied. But I was going to point out, using part of what I'd started last time, having to do with there are laws. I'm not necessarily going to codify them in a pithy sentence, assuming that I was up to such an exercise in pithiness. But I can pull out the examples again, and I believe that some of you will see, and it has to do with not the examples I'm using, not any of the contents of mundane life to which they were taken and to which they apply, but back to what we were discussing in general last time, not only the wide variance between what men say and the actions, the reality about which they're speaking. The difference between words and what the words are apparently referring to. Not only that absolute astounding distinction, but the fact that this is not recognized. Because this is one way to look at this, is one way to approach, whether I point out a particular method at the same time or whether you find your own various ones, to try and pry yourself away from that, which in fact seems to be you to start with. It's why such laws, as I'm calling them, governing the existence of man, are almost impossible to see, because they are such an absolute integral part of his existence, which is actually a shameful way of putting it. Again, it's like fish. You're trying to talk to a fish. I'll resort to that one. And describe to a fish the nature of water. If a fish had any vocabulary, if it had anything resembling human intelligence, it could not understand the nature of water, the nature of the oceans. Because the oceans are its life. And you can say, well, it's two different things. The water is its environment. Water is one thing. You can put water over here and you can put fish over there. Yeah, I know. But if you put the fish over there, the distinction will be lost. No matter what you tell a fish, after you say, wait a minute, fish, I can describe water to you. Let me show you. And you take the fish out of the water and you put him over here. And you say, okay, now you stay right there. Now look over here. Look at this big old bowl of water. Fish, are you looking? Fish. The distinction is lost. You cannot describe to a creature the environment which is, to that degree, an integral part, that although it's obviously two different substances to the mind, fish and water are two different objects. To the fish, operationally, water is its life, except there's no way for it to know it. Without water, a fish is not a fish. Without water, it can't live. And it's not just its environment. It looks so to us outside the environment that we're not dependent upon the same environmental conditions as the fish. When the fish, if it could think of itself, I plus not I equals fishdom, equals me. When you look at the fish, you can say, wait a minute, we could remove the not I part of your existentialist or your experiential equation. The I plus not I equals everything, equals existence. We can see we could remove water, and water is not actually a necessary part of your equation. But that is from an outsider's view, not just a human, it could be an eagle's view. To be a fern's view, if they could think. But you cannot do it with the creature involved. That once you removed it from that kind of environment. All right. Now, and this, of course, does not have to do with physical environment. I'm speaking now of mental. That these kinds of laws, these kinds of, well, let's just call them laws. Nothing spooky, but these kind of laws cannot be seen by the mind, because to the mind, the relationship to these as I'm calling them laws, is the same as between a fish and water. And so you can't expect the fish in some way of its own volition, no matter how smart a fish gets, no matter how much fish another fish eats, assuming fish is a form of brain food, as some people used to believe, no matter how smart a fish gets, a fish on its own will never have any comprehension of water. It is synonymous to its existence. In the same way, the mind normally will never see what I'm talking about, and it's everywhere. It's not hidden, it's not occult, it's not hocus pocus, it's not spooky, it's not New Age, it's not otherworldly, it's everywhere. But the mind cannot see it in the sense that I'm describing it, because it would be like expecting a fish to crawl out of the water and go, ah. It cannot happen. Getting out of the water is the end of the fish. That is the end of existence. What we were talking about, I pulled out an example which is fairly common. Last time, describing the situation that do occur, as I said, actually in life, wherein a city or a country is celebrating their Independence Day. The whole country is living it up, and then in the midst of it, just using their terms, a terrorist bombing occurs, killing many people, injuring thousands, and it stops the celebrations, of course, and rents the collective emotional soul and heart of the country. And within a few hours, the prime minister, the king, president, the mayor of the city, a de facto spokesman for the collective consciousness of that group of people shows up. Nowadays, they would show up on television, and they would say that as terrifying, as egregious an act as this was, that we cannot, as a group of civilized people, let this stop us. We cannot let the acts of one single madman bring civilization, our civilization, to a halt. And therefore, this afternoon, after making appropriate ceremonial appearances and laying wreaths and playing some music, I will announce the celebration officially to start back at 6 o'clock this afternoon. Least we give other potential madmen the belief that they can succeed in their nefarious acts and will just bring others out, will be tossing out bombs in the midst of civilized people, knowing it will bring the wheels of society to a halt. And I was pointing out, amongst other things, that there is a reality to which everyone is exposed, whether you've been exposed firsthand or secondhand. You know that is religion does it. I might get to that in a minute. It's not just the circumstance I'm describing, but it is something that occurs of a horrendous nature. And it doesn't have to be just man-made. It can be something else. But this is, I consider, a prime example, if you followed it last time. And he points this out, and people go, yes, 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 and they go through the formalities, and they even interview people in the streets after 6 o'clock when the festivities restart. And they will even ask strangers on the street, reporters, somebody, and say, well, how do you feel now after that horrible bombing incident of yesterday, but now the festivities are back? Are you in the spirit of it? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? And the person will say, they will begin to paraphrase what the Prime Minister had said earlier that day. And I might also point out to you, it's not even necessary that they saw him on television or heard him in person. But all the reporters have to do is stand there, people going by that show back up downtown for the festivities, and start saying, well, do you feel like it's proper for us to restart our celebration? Was the Prime Minister correct? How do you feel about this? Just what are your thoughts? And time after time, they'll stop people, and people say, well, I am heartbroken. I had a friend that was injured in it, or whatever it is. But they will say, it's obvious that we had to start it back. Because we can't allow the work of a madman to stop all of life. What I was pointing out last time, to try and get us up to what? The fourth floor? Speed. that is absolute nonsense. It is insane. Or let's just be plain, it's not true. It is prattle passing for insight. What the Prime Minister said, the punchline of it, that we've got to go back and do this. We've got to start back celebrations, or else, if we do let this stop us, if we do let this horrendous act get the better of us, this will only encourage other madmen to engage in similar acts. When everyone realizes, everybody, not my opinion, not some particular view, you ask anybody, qualifies by society's definition, as sane. Is that true? Do you think that just because we start the celebrations back here, that there are madmen somewhere keeping track, other madmen, that would love to throw a bomb out there, but then see that after only a day and a whole lot of hand-wringing and cursing and moaning and wailing and a little ceremony, a laying of a wreath and washing the blood off the street, that they went right back to partying, that some madman somewhere, they call him madman, I'm just accepting the definition, is sitting there watching on TV or hears about it in person and goes, well, I'll be damned, and it stops all of his plans. Yes, that we all realize. Well, that's the same way I say we all realize any sane person, given the situation I'm describing, if I had them apart and say, you know that's not true. They go, yeah, you're right. They know it's not true. In the same way that, well, let's press on. I wanted to take it expanded a bit. I pointed out that it serves a real purpose, that men must talk. Well, let me get to tonight's point. Let me start. It was a news item. I slipped in on you. That the greater the need, the greater the immediate need, if you'd like to throw in an adjective, the greater the need, the more tolerance men have of the gap between what they say and the reality of what their words refer to. Now, the example that I just selected, assuming that you still see, that any reasonable person, any sane person would see, that they know, regardless of what the prime minister, they could have the pope or the head of their national church show up and say that same kind of statement like, we must carry on. And sometimes they'll even say such things as, we must carry on. And this kind of a paraphrase, a different version of the original one I gave you, they'll say something like, well, we must carry on. Maybe they'll get there to the actual ceremony and lay a wreath and have a few seconds of silence and the band play a hymn or the national anthem, and the prime minister and dignitaries stand there over the spot where the bomb went off, where a lot of people were killed. They'll do all that, and then the king or the prime minister will say, well, now we're going to start the celebration back, just to show that the innocent victims of this act did not die in vain. And they'll strike up the band, everybody cheer. We're going to go back and party, and that at least will show that these poor innocent victims, men, women, little children, they did not die in vain. I'm not making this up. It's been going for thousands of years. And again, if I could stop reality, if there's some reason, I could ask any person there, any sane person, what connection does them going back partying and him saying that we're going to go back to show that the people didn't die in vain? Did I walk in, some kind of nut house movie? This is crazy. Do you believe that? Does that make any sense to you? And they would go, no. To prove, to show that they did not die in vain. All right, here's what I was getting at tonight. The greater the need, the more tolerance men have. Ordinary, sane men, and we're speaking about the collective of humanity at any given time and place, the greater tolerance they have for the gap, the real gap, between the words they're speaking and the behavior to which their words refer. So I thought I'd picked a fair example that, at least for that time and place, the people involved, somewhere that there was a tragedy. As I said, it could have been a natural disaster, it could have been an earthquake, or it could have been a man-made like this one. The greater the need, in this case the need, that there are those innocent people, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, celebrating, and a horrendous act takes place. Again, I'm just using their terms, ordinary, sane terms. We're not arguing with that. And by their descriptions throughout history, many innocent people were killed before their time. So this sort of thing, whether it be man-made or natural, does, on sane minds, sane hearts, as they used to say, it will weigh heavy. The people can be in shock, those that were there in the square when the explosion went off, or those who survived an earthquake or a monsoon that killed hundreds of thousands of people. The survivors of it, those witnesses of it, stagger around very often in physical shock. Those who are not there but who feel them part of the community. If it was one nation, then people there in that country, people of the same culture, they will feel a kind of shock, like how can this happen? Other parts of the world, so-called truly civilized people, will express their outrage and even say that they went into shock. People on the other side of the world, no connection to this country, to the people, they just say, well, it's shocking, especially when it's man-made, some terroristic act, some mass murder, whatever it was. They will say that indeed, it just almost takes the wind out of me. It almost takes away my belief in humanity, and et cetera, et cetera. The greater the need, so right then I'm just describing that there was a need. The prime minister's words, the king's words, the mayor's words, a priest's words, serves as a spokesman for this great need. And as I threw in the modifier that I didn't put in the news item, the more immediate the need is, the greater it is, the more intense it is. And so right at the time, shortly after the occurrence itself of some terroristic bombing, some natural disaster, the need is greatest the closer it is to the event. As I said, I was about to bring in religion of all sorts. Think about funeral services. Think about what ministers, priests, and rabbis historically say at funerals. Those of you that were sort of rolling your eyes and realizing that you never listened to kings and prime ministers making these commentaries after disasters, you've been faced with it all your life. You may have been faced with it when you had a family member, somebody you loved, died. And you were in such a state that you didn't pay much attention, but there it is, a man staying up there, to whom the family probably slipped a few dollars after, but it meant something at the time, you thought. The whole formality of putting away, laying out a dead, loved family member, let us say. And a minister will stand there and say things pertinent to your particular religion or the deceased religion, and you could be an atheist. You could have no interest in the religion, and you will sit there and sort of nod along. When what they're saying, there's no better example of prattle. Nonsense. What they're saying is absolute nonsense. The same way as saying that the Prime Minister is saying, well, we're going to start the festivities back to show that those innocent children and women who died here yesterday did not die in vain. And people will shed a tear and look down, and then the band will strike up and they'll go back to partying. What can you call that? The sentence makes sense, obviously, grammatically. But can you think of a better example of prattle, of nonsense? Or to stretch it just a bit, just for dramatic purposes, insanity. And yet it's not insane. But it is obvious. All you've got to do is ask a sane, ordinary mind, is what they're saying, does it bear any resemblance to the reality as we know it? Not my reality, not from some view, from their own reality. To take anybody who hears that at a funeral or hear a prime minister or a priest make such pronouncements in the aftermath of some public tragedy. You ask any sane mind there, if you give them alone, and you want, is what he's saying, does that bear any relationship to reality as you know it? To hear what a religious leader, a priest or someone says at the funeral of a dead person. Perhaps someone you love and you're all carried away, but if you could stop it right then and say what he's saying about life after death and the death of Jesus or whoever prophet, whatever religion it is, and about we're assured of life after death, we're assured that someday we'll all be together. We are. Oh, I guess that's why he's a priest and you're not. I guess that's why he's king. That's why he's prime minister, that he can say, well, in just a second we'll start the festivities back just to show as proof that those innocent people did not die in vain. You think, phew. You would have never thought to say that, probably. Most of the individuals there would not. And many of them, if there was a poll taken immediately after that about what do you think of the present prime minister, I mean, his rating would probably be 99% for a few hours. People who'd never heard, because it means so much. They would say, I have never been touched like that. He expressed my sentiments exactly, which is a subcontext of how far removed words are from reality, because that person would have never thought that. That's one reason that they have a prime minister. That's one reason that we have kings, heroes, leaders, in the non-physical sense, not just the meanest wolf leading the pack, which under certain conditions we still won't, humans won't, but under the non-physical conditions, he was expressing for the collective thoughts which they would never have. But if you ask them, if you said, what does all that mean? I mean, they go, well, it just shows that we're still human, and we have the human spirit, and we will not lay down and die just because of some small calamity like this. So we're going back and parting, and to prove that those people didn't die in vain. They go, yeah, that's what you just said. I go, but that's crazy. It's crazy. And they go, well, yeah, I guess you're right. But they believe, if they did not think about it, which they won't. That's not the purpose. And as you know, or those of you who might be just watching this, my purpose is not trying to stick balloons in reality, which I could try. There's enough useless acts one can do in life. Unless you just want to reach the epitome of useless acts. There are no sham balloons out of which sham air should be let. I'm not attempting to stick balloons in spins in any balloons, or not any. But I'm showing you again that there is an absolute, recognizable, demonstrative gap, not by my definition, but by their own definition of ordinary people, between what they say, between the words and the reality that the words refer to. The greater the need, the more tolerance men have. Therefore, you can hear a prime minister, a priest, a rabbi at a funeral. They can say things, and they can even say things this side somewhere less than an absolute over the laying away of a dead body. Somewhere in between there is part of what keeps religion and almost every aspect of civilization going to some degree, is that there is a need. And the greater the need at any particular time, and the need could be worldwide, which is, well, I shouldn't even say that. It would take a worldwide calamity. The need can expand over an area this size, like a whole country, a continent, half a country, a city, and it shifts just constantly. It's like lightning hitting the earth. It just happens here for a while, and it's over here for a while. It can get to a neighborhood. It can be momentary. Not long enough for somebody to get a sentence out. It can only last a minute or so, or it can last hours. But when the greater there is some immediate need, that there is something has happened, such as bombing, let's say. In this city that's celebrating their independence, and a bomb goes off and kills thousands of people. All right, to civilized minds, they are just aghast. They are in a supreme state of nonplusness, bewildered, staggered, frightened. Think about it. That there you are amidst of all your friends and neighbors, a great celebration. You know, the independence of our country, they could be a religious celebration, the founder of their religion, and in the midst of this, innocent people, civilians there, and a bomb goes off and kills thousands or hundreds of people. And it will. Ordinary, sane people will stagger around according to how far they are from ground zero physically and metaphorically. But to decreasing degrees, they will still, though, be in a state of shock, absolute bewilderment. It will almost stop civilized thought. And something needs to be done. Always needs to be done. And what always happens is someone will speak about the tragedy, about the need. I'm calling it a tragedy, but the news item, I was trying to cover it all. The greater the need, the more tolerance men have for the gap between what is being said and the reality about which the words are referring. So, the greater the need that something horrible happens, natural or man-made, the greater it is. The more people it kills, the more horrendous it is, by their definition. It's not important. But the greater the need is, the greater the tragedy which produces the need, the greater it is, the more tolerance those involved, ordinary, sane, rational, literate, educated, sophisticated people, the more bullshit they'll put up with. Of course, I'm putting it now sort of a negative, humorous, or sardonic twist. The greater the need, the greater the tolerance they have for someone to speak for them in terms that is absolute prattle. It's insane. It's irrational. It is non-believable under ordinary circumstances. And yet, the tolerance expands for that time period. All right, I thought maybe some of you would go, huh? I wish everybody would go, huh? And I can only assume anybody watching this at some later time via the airways or your friendly cable operator, that you can see what I'm pointing out. There's no judgment, there's nothing funny, there's nothing sarcastic involved. And if this, me pulling out examples on a very public level is too much, I refer you back to the idea of religion, which some people find too personal. And so some people prefer the more public one of a calamity of some public nature. But I can refer you back, if you can keep from choking on examples of religion, because it's not attacking religion either, but people will. They become frightened. It doesn't just take deaths. Somebody can be afraid that they themselves are about to die and will consult with their priest, some religious leader. And they will accept from him ideas, promises, placations of a verbal nature that under almost any other conditions, this same person would reject out of hand. It's not that hard to see. Well, all right, I can take it even further. It's a kid screaming late at, in the middle of the night, and you run in, your little child, and he's saying that he saw some kind of woolly monster up his window. And you go, oh no. You go, that was the angel. Everyone has an angel. And it was just the darkness of the night. But that was your guardian angel who looks after you, who in fact stays outside the house to make sure you are safe. And the little kid goes, really? And you go, yes. And he goes, aw. And you hug him and leave. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Humans, adult humans, certainly do not like such comparisons, but there is no difference. The greater the need, the more tolerance men have for the demonstrative gap between words and the reality to which they are referring. I said I can only trust and hope, if I'm going to carry this further, which I'm about to, that you can see what I'm describing. That under times of great duress, large groups of people, whole little societies, or a whole church, a whole family, will accept words from some apparent source of authority, a leader of some kind, religious or mundane leader, political leader. They will take assurances, that is words. This is all verbal now, but they will take verbal assurances that are so far removed from the reality that they are experiencing. This is not theoretical. It's that the words that they are accepting are so far removed from the reality that they are experiencing right then that it's almost unbelievable, other than the fact that I'm going to try to tighten your sight up with, other than the fact that that example, as blatant as it may now appear that I've described it, it goes on in everything in the life of man in which the mind is involved. That this kind of thing just may seem to be extreme. That is, that the Prime Minister can speak about, we're going to start the celebrations back, least. That if we don't, it will encourage other madmen to do it. Well, we've already been through that one. Anybody there, if you could extract them from the immediate duress and the stress of the situation right then, that is, people who were there and witnessed the bombing, maybe they're bleeding themselves, or a friend, someone was injured or killed. All right, if you could extract them momentarily from the pressure of the situation, the need of the situation, and you say, what the Prime Minister just said, I noticed you nodding and along and almost crying. The person go, yeah, and you go, well, that is absolute nonsense. You know damn well, starting back to festivities is not going to have any effect on whether a madman plants another bomb somewhere. If that's all that would stop it, you could stop this one before it happened. We'd know how to handle madmen. You know that's not true. And the person has to go, yeah. The expansion I gave you tonight, that it can even be explained to them that one of the reasons we're doing this, which is a form of having funerals, the kind of ritualistic burying of people, and the words that are said, it's the same thing as the Prime Minister of this country saying we're going to start the festivities back, not only to keep other madmen from being encouraged to engage in such nefarious acts, but also to show, to prove is what they say, to prove that the innocent people who died here yesterday did not die in vain. And people stand there and tears come to their eyes as they're supposed to. Many people feel much better. But again, if you could extract somebody from that situation, any ordinary sane person, and go, the man's crazy. Did you hear what he just said? And they go, yeah. What does you partying have to do, you or anybody else? How's that going to prove? Of course, I'm just being real cursory with this whole thing about to prove that innocent people didn't die in vain. The whole thing is a crock. From a more expanded view of saying that anybody was an innocent victim of something. If you're alive, you're an innocent victim. You just hadn't been slaughtered yet. I mean, it's just a fact. It's just a variation of saying, well, he died before his time. Yeah, right. Except the thing is, the day that you popped out of your mother, the time was ripe. The only reason you didn't die then is because death was too busy. Life needed you for some reason. But there is no such thing as an innocent victim. But anyway, back to what I was trying to point to specifically tonight. Everyone there, if you could extract them from the needs, that is the pressures of the situation itself, they know that the words being spoken, whether they come from a prime minister, a priest, a rabbi, a king, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a grief counselor, their mother, their father, anyone who stands up and offers such words. The greater the need, the further the words can be removed from the reality that they are experiencing right then, that they're in the midst of it, and they know what's being said at one level. Or it's demonstratively so, that you could take them aside, or you could do it later. Under the right conditions, you either hear what I'm saying or not. It's not an argument. If they are sane by their own definition, then at another moment, outside that particular pressure, they know that if it's pointed out, they never come to this conclusion by themselves. They never think about it. But you could take them aside, any sane person, and go, you realize that's just insane. I mean, just on the surface of it, what he just said. Again, nobody wants to answer, and you certainly, anybody who understands this, would never pull this on an ordinary person. You would never stop a funeral service. You wouldn't take somebody aside and say, do you realize, I mean, I know you people felt bad about your mother dying, but I like you people. I always respect your intelligence. I've never been to a funeral like this. What was this crap about that priest or that shaman, whoever it was, talking about that they are now living up in the trees with gods or in heaven and paradise, and that he knows it, and how assured we are of the fact because it says so in those papers he had that they've been saving for several hundred years. You go, are you people crazy? You know you wouldn't do that. But in a sense, they do know it's crazy, but crazy now in the sense that the words being spoken have no relationship, not useful. They have no real relationship to the experience, to the reality that they are experiencing. It's just a fact. If that is now, after all these minutes tonight, if you can catch a glimpse of that that's simply true. The same thing is in continual existence. This was a kind of law I said that running the everyday existence of man, which the mind is never aware of because it is to the mind as water is to a fish. But this is the same kind of law, that everything man says has some. You remember once I described to you, it's no great secret, that any good machine to work must have tolerance between its working parts. It simply does. It gets to a certain point, whether you never thought about it, but if you're going to try to make a set of gears, a gear arrangement work, and you've got two gears, the closer they work, the tighter they are, the more efficient they operate, up to a certain point. Because if you get them too efficient, you get them to the point of maximum efficiency and you go just that far past it, they won't move. They now fit, they operate in such close conjunction that they will not operate. So therefore there has to be a tolerance in all machinery. That is, you understand, a looseness of some degree or the parts will not move. There is that same kind of need it is a law, it is in continual operation, that there is a tolerance between what men say of the most sincere, the most solemn pronouncements that they make about life and about reality and what men should do and what their pronouncements about the nature of life. There is a built-in tolerance. It's not a mistake, it's not a flaw, it's not a reflection of their insensitivity or their stupidity, but there is a built-in mechanical tolerance. That is to say, a gap, a looseness, a distinction. No matter how hard they try, no matter how specific or sincere they attempt to be, there is a gap between everything a man says, that all men say, and the reality to which the words are referring. But now, again, we're going to have to leave the tapes out, but I'm pointing out, I assume, we will rhetorically assume that everyone saw what I was pointing out about the Prime Minister and his statements, regardless of the fact of the purpose it serves and how that it's necessary, that it still can be seen by those involved. If they're taken outside the immediate need, they see that there is such a tolerance between what's being said and the reality as they know it, that it's just absolutely folly. It's just prattle. It's almost insane. And yet, you get outside those sorts of situations, which are an anomaly in most people's lives. They only happen periodically, and most people only experience it second or third hand from news reports. When it gets into your everyday life, the tolerance, the examples, the need seems so minuscule. You don't need somebody constantly trying to explain away life and rationalize things. You do it for yourself. You stumble through making your own pronouncements, your thoughts. Not that you're responsible, but you got your own prime minister, your own priest, your own mother, your own head talking wolf, and it continues to explain what's going on. When, to a more, from any knowledgeable view, from anything resembling an objective view, if you could do it, what you're saying, the gap between what you're saying about reality and the reality you're experiencing is enough to make a more alert man gag. Figure of speech. It's enough to somewhere along the way, I'll go back to the original one tonight, you think, how could somebody live and be as blind and as stupid as I've been up until now and still have a suit, a tie, and a good job, and a wife, and a family, several dogs, a home at the lake? And I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve. I should be ashamed any time that I hear humanity spoken of, and I just include myself. The gap is not insurmountable. At its natural workings, there's no need to worry about it because it is necessary. But part of the very things that unsettle would-be mystics, part of the very thing that never seems to settle down inside of the few, is tied to what I'm describing. And you keep looking here, you keep looking there, and it's back and forth, and you're trying to do something that cannot be done. You're trying to make sense out of that which exists only by virtue of it not making any sense. You understand? Because civilization, for instance, wouldn't hold together if you could stop people and go, wait a minute, what the prime minister, what the king, what the priest just said about reality, that's nonsense. And they go, you're right. End of everything. Of course, one last, remember, those who know are only happy when it's their building that got blown down. That's the only thing that counts, folks.